Forest Service went before the judge and asked him to lift the injunction because they had a whole new plan. They weren't going to go back to their old ways of cutting. And the judge lifted the injunction on that basis. They immediately went back to their old ways of cutting. One of the most visited places in the Shawnee National Forest is called Garden of the Gods. And in the last couple of years, they've logged hundreds of acres over there. And that timber, Josh, is being ground up, is being taken to another state and ground up into livestock bedding.
Welcome, wild ones. This is your host, Josh Schlossberg of the Green Root Podcast, the official podcast of Eco Integrity Alliance, where we're on a quest to uncover the roots of the ecological crisis. For this episode, we have two great guests, Sam Stearns and John Wallace. Sam Stearns is the founder of Friends of Bell Smith Springs, an organization that promotes the preservation and protection of the Bell Smith Springs National Natural Landmark and other public land. As a board member of Shawnee Park and Climate Alliance, he seeks to create the Shawnee National Park and Climate Preserve to protect the Shawnee Hills of Southern Illinois. And John Wallace has been a forest activist on the Shawnee National Forest for over 36 years, serves as the president of the Shawnee chapter of Illinois Audubon Society, the vice president of the Shawnee Park and Climate Alliance, and a longtime member of the Friends of Bell Smith Springs. Sam and John, welcome to the Green Root Podcast.
Thank you, Josh.
Great to be here, Josh.
So I actually have some breaking news to add in before the podcast because it's directly relevant. And John Wallace, who is one of the guests, he emailed me after the podcast to let me know what happened. So I'll just read his email and then we'll just go into the podcast. Josh, about 30 minutes after our Zoom call ended, our attorney notified us that the court granted our motion for a TRO, temporary restraining order. He sent us a copy of the order, so Sam and I printed several versions. He went to the logging site, and I went to the district ranger office just before closing at 4:25 p.m. After I gave the ranger a copy, my wife and I headed to Bell Smith Springs to meet with Sam. On the way, we flagged down a Forest Service law enforcement vehicle to notify them. When we made it to the project site, we had an emotional reunion. And here's a photo of that. This is John Wallace and Sam Stearns. I thought you might be interested. Best, John. And let's get into the podcast. Before we get into our regularly scheduled program, I do have a quick shout out on an event that's happening from Heartwood. And Heartwood has been on the Green Root Podcast and they're a member of Eco Integrity Alliance. So just going to read that real quickly for folks to be aware of it. Heartwood cordially invites you to attend this year's Fall Gathering reunion on October 3rd to 5th, a weekend at the farm where we were founded with the foremost folks in the forest defense movement. This is in
south of Paoli, Indiana, in the midst of the Hoosier National Forest, location called the Lazy Black Bear.
And so this year's event is shaping up to be part serious workshops and part mini arts and music festival. Whether you've been a member for years of Heartwood or you're just hearing about Heartwood for the first time, they welcome you to join them for a weekend of great food and live music in a family-friendly community building atmosphere. You can go to their website at heartwood.org events reunion. So heartwood.org/events/reunion for an updated schedule, links for registration and more about the event. And no, we were not paid for that advertisement. Anyway, let's get into our topic. So tell us, where is Bell Smith Springs? What is Bell Smith Springs? And what is currently happening in Bell Smith Springs? Either of you want to take that?
Well, Bell Smith Springs National Natural Landmark within the Shawnee National Forest is about a mile and a half behind me. It's in extreme southern Illinois. It's a canyon where four creeks come together, and even when the creeks dry up at this time of year, when the creeks are pretty dry, there's always a dozen ice cold spring pools there where people can swim and wade and cool off.
That's very helpful. Excellent. So this is in National Forest that we're dealing with right now?
Currently, yes, it will eventually be part of the Shawnee National Park and Climate Preserve.
Okay, and maybe, yeah, tell me a little bit about the makeup of the forest there. So this is Eastern deciduous. Tell us a little bit about that so we can get a picture of it.
You want me to do that, Sam?
Please,
So,
John.
so it is a part of the central hardwoods bioregion. The Shawnee is an eastern mesophytic, mixed mesophytic forest with, I believe it's 28 different classified plant communities. We have everything from cypress tupelo swamps, similar to the kind of wetlands you find in Georgia and Louisiana, and uh, all the way to the Ozark Plateau, similar to the limestone outcroppings that you find often in Missouri and Arkansas, and then the Shawnee Hills, which is a more sandstone dominated, um, more Appalachian in nature, on the center and in eastern part of the Shawnee. It's 294,000 acres in size. And it spans from the Mississippi River on the west to the Ohio River on the east, and which also borders it on the south. And so it's right down in the tip of Illinois, a relatively long state. The trees that are found there, we have 19 species of oak native to our forest. We have, I believe it's 9 species of hickory, 6 of maple, just a varied and incredible diversity of hardwood trees, hardwood and mixed hardwood trees. And it's currently under threat by the U.S. Forest Service. The U.S. Forest Service is actively logging one of the most unique watersheds, the most important watersheds we have, and that's the watershed of the Bell-Smith Springs National Natural Landmark that Sam spoke about, which is a designation that is made on places that have such unique natural and geologic features on a national scale. The Park Service recognizes national natural landmarks, but doesn't manage them, doesn't oversee them. The Forest Service, in this case, is the land managing agency over it, and we're trying to change that.
And at Bell-Smith Springs alone, Josh, there are over 700 species of plants, as well as a number of rare fauna, uh, lichen grasshoppers and minnows that are found in very few places, protected bat species. It is a truly unusual, unique, and beautiful place.
Thanks for that intro of the area. So I'm looking at some photos online. Yeah, it is a uniquely beautiful area. There's definitely a place in my heart for I guess it still counts as the eastern hardwood forest, because that's where I grew up and I lived many years, although I was further in the Northeast. But just looking at the photos, it does feel like home, yet it has its own unique, distinct characteristics. So out west, which is where a lot of the focus of Eco Integrity Alliance is, and that's where I'm living right now in Colorado, we have a lot of logging in the name of wildfire. So what is their justification for cutting in Bell-Smith Springs?
Go ahead, John.
Well, their justification is to improve forest health. And the general definition of improving forest health by the USDA Forest Service in this part of the world is improving our oak hickory component, predominantly oak trees. No forest. And this is a quote that Sam likes to use a lot. You simply cannot log a forest back to health. And we have, especially the forest that is being logged currently, is so dominated by oaks, it's not even funny. The USDA Forest Service is flat wrong, claiming that this area needs to be logged to improve its health. Because there isn't enough advanced oak regeneration on the landscape, and there is plenty of oak regeneration. But the reason it's not advanced is because the USDA Forest Service burned it a year ago last winter, and all the oak saplings, anywhere from about 1 inch in diameter stems down to 4 or 5 feet, were killed back to the ground with this prescribed fire. And it's not one of the first. They burned it for years in the past, but this really knocked this growth back. And now the Forest Service is correct. There isn't the advanced development of the oaks, but it's not because they're too shaded, which is what they claim. It's actually a relatively open forest, and our forests vary a lot depending on soils, depending on exposure aspect. It's if it's a south and western facing slope, it's generally much drier, and it generally tends to be dominated by oaks and hickories. But if it's a north facing slope or a low floodplain area, or closer to intermittent streams, it's much more moister, and you're going to have a lot of maples and beech and tulip tree and many other species that you wouldn't have in those dry upland areas. But this area was doing quite well until the Forest Service did this artificial burn, and now it's knocked back, and it will come back, but the degradation that's taking place right now, our soils are real dry. Generally, we get and we do, this is August is a dry month. September is generally a pretty dry month here, but our forests are pretty moist most of the time. But even so, in an area like this, with predominantly west and south facing slopes, shallow soils, highly erodible soils, it tends to be dominated by the oaks and the hickories, and the Forest Service chose to go in and start logging after Friends of Bell-Smith Springs filed suit last month. And it's very interesting how this whole thing took place, because the Forest Service right now has over 15,000 acres of land that they've already made their final decisions on for logging. And we have basically no logging industry that depends on the Shawnee at all, and it's my understanding that the Forest Service basically, and this was a classic result, this sale, the Forest Service, quote, advertised it. They posted it on their website. That's not advertising as we've come to expect the Forest Service, and I'm pretty sure the law states, but they posted it for a month, and they had back in January, and they had no bidders on this, and they kept it up for another month just to see if anyone would bid. No contractors bid on it, and it sat there until we filed the lawsuit, until Friends of Bell-Smith Springs filed the lawsuit, and Sam can illustrate a little more of how that all took place, I think.
Yes, some 30 years ago, the Forest Service announced that they were going to clear cut 3,400 acres around the Bellsmith Springs Canyon, as well as take out the big hardwoods along the creeks leading into that canyon. And it was known then as Bellsmith Springs timber sales. A lot of people were aware of what a special place Bellsmith Springs is. And so there was some public outcry over that. And so they changed the name to OA6, that is Opportunity Area 6, to confuse people a little bit more about it back then. Ultimately, our current attorney, Tom Buchel, got on board with us, and he got an injunction in federal court that halted all logging, drilling, and mining, and ATV use, all-terrain vehicle use, on the Shawnee National Forest. And that lasted for 18 years. When they came back, well, they got that injunction lifted finally because the Forest Service went before the judge and asked him to lift the injunction because they had a whole new plan. They weren't going to go back to their old ways of cutting. And the judge lifted the injunction on that basis. They immediately went back to their old ways of cutting. One of the most visited places in the Shawnee National Forest is called Garden of the Gods. And in the last couple of years, they've logged hundreds of acres over there. And that timber, Josh, is being ground up, is being taken to another state and ground up into livestock bedding. So that, and climate-wise, it's a loser at every step. You know, from the time they disturb the soil, cut the trees, carbon's released into the atmosphere, they truck it, in that case, to Missouri, grind it up into this livestock bedding, which is only used for a year or less, at which point it's discarded, and as it decomposes, releases more carbon into the atmosphere. So there's nothing, and even for people who don't give one whit about ecology, about the forest itself, it's a fiscal loser. No timber sale on the Shawnee National Forest has ever made money. So this go round, we of course monitor announced timber sales in the Shawnee, but this time instead of calling it Bellsmith Springs logging, they called it McCormick Oak Hickory Restoration, and it slipped by us. We didn't know that the plan was in the works, that they were doing scoping on it until just about less than 2 weeks before the scoping period was up. There was an anonymous envelope left in my mailbox, no address, no return address, with the scoping documents in it. And so we immediately mobilized people to generate comments during scoping. Comments were overwhelmingly opposing this logging. So we've been watching this. We contacted Tom Buchel. He submitted comments to the Earthrise Law Center in Portland, Oregon, for Friends of Bellsmith Springs and another local grassroots group, the Regional Association of Concerned Environmentalists. And every week, one of our dedicated members, John's wife, Karen Fraley, has been monitoring the usual legal notice places to see if when this timber sale was put up for bid. Every week she checks, and every week she has reported back that nope, they haven't offered it up for bid yet. Well, it got by us last February because when they put it up for bid, they again changed the name of the project. It was now called the V-Plow project. And so no one knew what that meant or what to look for it. Fortunately, a member of the Regional Association of Concerned Environmentalists, one of the plaintiffs in our lawsuit, noticed that the acreage was the same as this particular timber sale. And we put two and two together and were able to find out that, yes, this was This was the timber sale. As John said, there were no bidders on this timber sale. So they awarded the contract to a logger in Kentucky, 70 acres of thinning these trees, taking out the big hardwoods for $24,000. So once again, it's going to be a money loser as it uh, impacts the ecology of the surrounding forest, and it is upstream, adjacent to one of the creeks that flow into the Bell-Smith Springs National Natural Landmark, where they have been logging this week, it looks like a moonscape. It's just powder dry soil that's 4 to 6 inches deep when you walk through it. And anytime that they disturb the soil around here, the first thing that pops up, as it did in this case, they first uh, bulldozed a road in and a log landing. And 2 weeks ago, that whole area in there was head high with invasive exotic species. And that's what they generally give as one of the excuses for logging, is to get rid of invasive exotics for the sake of our native hardwoods. But in no case that I'm aware of on the Shawnee National Forest has that plan ever worked. And I've been to a bunch of them. I had been doing monitoring on sites that were cut 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 3, 4 years ago. And the invasive exotics just take over. And they're, as I say, they've never accomplished their stated goals by logging. The only known cause of oak decline here in the central hardwoods that I'm aware of is chainsaws.
Great. Well, thank you for all that information. Yeah, that definitely gets me up to speed and our listeners as well. So let me ask you a couple questions here. So in regards to this name change stuff, do you feel as if that was the U.S. Forest Service intentionally trying to hide stuff so people wouldn't be able to track what they're doing?
Um,
That's an easy one, John. You can have it.
I don't question it. It doesn't make sense. Josh, this is a 70-acre logging site, and I want to really stress they refer to it as intermediate thinning, and it is all done with a feller buncher. And anyone that's familiar with feller bunchers and skidders, so this equipment, when it goes in to cut a tree, you think of, oh, thinning, it's just a tree here, a tree there, that sort of thing. That's not the case. They literally have to cut all trees out of the way to get this big piece of equipment in there, and they do that. So there's these big holes, and as Sam described, moonscapes. It doesn't make sense. I understand if we have projects, large projects that are several thousand acres, and then when they sell the timber, they'll name the timber to be something different, because there's so many different stands of timber that they're offering for sale. That's not the case here. It's just one project. There's no reason to have changed it. But deception is what the USDA Forest Service is so good at. And that's really the root of this lawsuit that again, Tom Buchel put together and filed. I believe it was on July 16th. And it's amazing the time frame. Then July 29th, so nobody bid on this. No one was interested in this project until July 29th. The Forest Service just gave it to this timber operator from Benton, Kentucky. Following the litigation, the trees were marked late fall. We couldn't believe, this is the big logging season, generally late summer, early fall around here, because it's generally dry. The wood is apparently a little better because of the sap is draining, is where they want it to be in the logs and that sort of thing. And so it doesn't surprise me at all. But what I wanted to point out was how deceptive the Forest Service has been in this process. They notified us. We only had 21 days to respond for scoping, and they said, one of the endangered species that we have around in the Shawnee is the Indiana bat. I don't know if you're familiar, bat populations are just crashing. It's devastating. Same has been, it actually sounds like the Indiana bat's stabilizing a little bit, but still it's federally endangered. And they told us that they had concerns, and they did a site evaluation and found no Indiana bats. So it won't affect Indiana bats or any other bats. And then the other big concern, because back in 1999, federal court told the Forest Service that they can't log this area because it's so sensitive due to this national natural landmark, all this watershed that goes into this incredible, this time of year, it's hot and muggy in southern Illinois, and people just flock to Bell Smith Springs because of these cool spring pools. And so, the court said, go back and redo your EA. This was 1999, and give a thorough evaluation of the soil types, the slopes, and all mitigation efforts that you're going to undertake to ensure the public that Bell Smith Springs will stay pure. So what the Forest Service just abandoned the project instead of doing any of that, and waited for 25 years, and then all of a sudden just popped the 70, tried to sneak in this 70-acre parcel. And well, they've snuck it in. It's happening. And then they told us the slopes were 0 to 22% on, with somewhat erodible soils. Well, in reality, not only were Indiana bats found on 4 different nights when they did surveys, we had to uncover all this stuff through Freedom of Information Act requests. It take months now. It used to be when, we used to have project files that we could go into the office and look through. All this information would be available to us, but that's not the case anymore. If you want any specific information, you have to file a Freedom of Information Act and be ready to wait at least 6 months. It's just criminal how much they've abused the Freedom of Information Act. So come to find out, 4 nights, they detected Indiana bats with audio recordings. 2 nights they detected the tricolored bat, which is an accepted candidate species. And 1 night they found a gray bat, which is another federally endangered species. Told us nothing. Come to find out, what they did tell us about how there's no Indiana bats was they put up mist nets in one area that's just adjacent to the project area, not even in the project area. They put up mist nets, and they only did it for 4.5 hours that night and caught 1 red bat. That was it. And said, well, there's no Indiana bats there. The same thing happened with the soils. Come to find out, the soil slopes are not only highly erodible soils, if you look at the maps, that we didn't have access to, that they didn't provide, but the slopes are 35 degrees instead of, or 35% instead of 22% slopes. And when we brought up our concerns about Bell Smith Springs, the only response we got from in the decision notice, the decision memo, so they used a categorical exclusion and said, there's not an issue with erosion. And in fact, there is. They didn't take any consideration regarding the Bell Smith Springs, like the court told them to do back in 1999. And so here we are. Deception is one of their most valuable tools, frankly.
And this deception is this occurring now is certainly nothing new. It's an extension of policies that they've engaged in for as long as I've been involved in this, for several decades. A few decades ago, when they announced that they were going to be doing clear cutting at Bellsmith Springs, and the public became so incensed, the Forest Service took down the road signs off the highways that for how to get to Bellsmith Springs. They took down all the signs because people started flocking there to go see it after we started publicizing how important it was and what threat it was under. So that's sort of that's sort of ongoing deception. Another thing is we used to have people will recall T-spurs. Every year, the Forest Service issued a T-spurs report. That acronym, let's see, that stood for Timber Sale Program Income Reporting
System.
And every year, it showed that nationwide, the Forest Service lost hundreds of millions of dollars selling the public's timber. And on the Shawnee, no timber sale had ever made any profit. That's still the case to this day. We don't have the valuable kind of timber here that are on some western forests. But after a couple of decades of issuing these T-spurs reports and getting excoriated in the press every year over this waste of taxpayer money, they just discontinued the reports. The General Accounting Office said there's no point in doing these reports anymore because the information that the Forest Service gives us for these reports is so unreliable that we don't think it's worth issuing reports. So that was the end of T-spurs.
Yeah, I think that speaks volumes. And most of my listeners to the Green Root podcast are well aware of the shenanigans of the U.S. Forest Service. But unfortunately, a lot of Americans are not. I think they're becoming increasingly aware of it with things getting exacerbated. But yeah, basically the way I look at it and the way I try to communicate things, it's like, okay, so the agency itself has a conflict of interest in its mission. Basically, they are both supposed to be the nation's greatest custodians and stewards and protectors of public lands, forests, and simultaneously, they are the number one threat by carrying out timber sales, fake forest health, fake fuel reduction, et cetera, et cetera. And I've been trying to figure out an analogy, and you can tell me if this one's working or I got to tinker with it a little more, is imagine there is a business that's like, hey, come in and we're going to help you improve your kidney health, right? We're going to give you the best nutrition. We're going to make sure everything is great for your kidneys. We also have a side project, which is while you're sleeping, we harvest and sell your kidneys. So would anyone go to that business or think that they are in any way trustworthy? And that's anyway, that's the way I look at the US Forest Service. And I think this is really telling that they've come up with different schemes in different ecoregions. Maybe they can't just say wildfire and then log in your neck of the woods, although I'm sure they are doing that. But out here in the West, all they have to do is say wildfire, and everyone's like, okay, well, okay. And then they have forest in their name. It says Forest Service and it says the word service. So it's all of this obfuscation. But it's interesting that they have this unique version of forest health. They can come up with, they look at a forest and they just like, all right, what's wrong with it? And I almost pity them. Like sometimes I go into, well, frequently I go into the wilderness because I live not far from wilderness areas here in Colorado. My backyard is literally the Roosevelt National Forest. And I'm walking out there and I sometimes picture myself as one of these land managers, whatever you want to call them. And imagine how upsetting it is for them to walk in the wilderness and just look around and be like, this place is all wrong. Look at how unhealthy, look at how messed up. Like imagine having to live where you look at a natural ecosystem and you think that there's just something inherently wrong with it. Anyway, that's my little spiel on that. But so what's currently going on right now with this project? Are they in the forest cutting or are they about to? What's the deal exactly?
They are cutting as we speak. Uh, as John mentioned earlier, categorical exclusions. The categorical exclusions cannot exceed 70 acres or a half mile of road building. So this project is 69 acres and just shy of a half mile of road building. And so it's apparent to me that, as I said there, that a few decades ago they announced they were going to clear cut 3,400 acres of this land, and I think it's their intention to eat that elephant one 70-acre bite at a time. And but if they're allowed to use, or I should say misuse, categorical exclusions, then that's how they would accomplish that without doing true environmental analysis.
So right now, what options remain? So you have lawsuit. Is is that going to stop this? What's happening right now in the fight?
Well, now a motion for a temporary restraining order was filed um, on well, it was Wednesday, wasn't it, this week?
Yeah, just a couple of days ago.
And the Forest Service, interestingly, so when we litigate, and Sam and I have been involved in litigation for about 30 years on the Shawnee. When we litigate on the National Forest, we have to do it into the U.S. District Court in Southern Illinois. And so attorneys from the Department of Justice usually come from the Metro East St. Louis area, which is the closest metropolitan area that we have to Southern Illinois. And there's another courthouse in East St. Louis, Illinois, and we usually have attorneys that represent the Forest Service there. Well, when this one was filed, the attorney that I think is pretty well known, according to our attorney Tom Bushell, came from Washington D.C. and he's filing documents from Washington. So we filed this. Thanks to Tom and his crack legal team, they filed this on Wednesday. When I woke up on Thursday morning, the Forest Service had already filed a response, and so yesterday, Tom scrambled and put together a reply, because this this response to Tom's emergency motion for a temporary restraining order was just full of all sorts of post hoc rationalization. You know, the district ranger, I think, had a 16-page declaration where he actually said that we reasoned that there would be no impact to the bats populations, really. You know, even though bats were discovered, were detected, this really wouldn't happen. And all of this, you can't do that. This is administrative law that we're involved in. So our claims are with the National Environmental Policy Act and the Administrative Procedures Act, and everything is restricted to the record. You can't, after the lawsuit was filed, then bring in new information. And that's exactly what the Forest Service created, all these false narratives. They even came up with the fact that, well, yeah, there are 35% slopes and there are highly erodible soils, but the 0 to 22% was the average slope percentage. And it's like, no, it wasn't. That was not, it just, again, it's all part of that deception of just, I hope they don't get away with it, but this is such a small timber sale that we're worried that by the time the judge responds, I literally have my phone sitting right next to me, hoping that we get a call from our attorney that the judge has made a decision. But it's not going to take long with feller bunchers and skidders to make our litigation moot. And and again, it's a great strategy. 70 acres at a time, like Sam said. You just dice it up little by little and go after it and still accomplish the same goal. But it's interesting. Our forests are not fire dependent. Fire is a part of eastern deciduous forest, but it's not a dominant part. It's not like it is out west. These are not conifer forest, and our forests aren't dry like many of the mountainous forests are. And so fire, when we have a fire, even prescribed fire, it takes a lot of energy to get those things to burn. It really does. So that leaf litter is usually pretty darn wet. And it doesn't burn but it doesn't burn the heavy litter, the woody debris that's found on the forest floor, because that soaks up all the moisture too. It's just there's so much. Our forests are very wet, but they still bring in that dealing with fuels, hazardous fuels. Thinning's going to even help. With these hazardous fuels, even though the last, I'm almost certain that the last supposed quote wildfire we had was in 2021, and it involved, they brought in 17 firefighters from around the country, and 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 it was started on private land, and I don't know this for certain, but I would wager that this is how it started. The landowner thought, well, I'm watching the Forest Service and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources burn forests, so I'll just do it on my private property. It never even came on the Shawnee, and it was a whopping 30 acres. And it just burns a leaf litter. We don't get canopy fires now if you open up the forest and get all this vegetative and herbaceous growth, which of course dies in the winter, then it's a lot more flammable. And those, you get a lot of prairie species growing, and we might have canopy fires developing. But anyway, it's just not, it's not realistic that these forests required, and these species required fire. It existed naturally. It is natural, but most of our storms that involve, our thunderstorms that come through here, usually it's at a time of year when everything is so darn wet that even if a fire does start, it's quickly extinguished.
Sure.
Yeah. Prescribed fire as a management tool was not an issue here on the Shawnee until Congress changed the access to the fuels reduction fund and allowed that to apply to eastern forest as well as out west. And so now that the Forest Service gets paid by the acre for how much they can burn, as soon as that became the law, the Forest Service announced every acre of the Shawnee needs to be burned now. And in this operation that's going on behind my house right now, just a few years ago, we had a period of just the ground was saturated. We were getting days and days of rain. And I was on my way home one day, and the burn crews are out there, and they're pouring diesel fuel all through the forest and trying to get it to light. There were literally puddles of water throughout the forest, but they're out there burning And when I asked one of the Forest Service employees, "Hey, what's up with this? Why are you guys trying to burn when the place is saturated with water?" They said, "Well, the deadline for burning for to get money from the Fuels Reduction Fund is up this Friday, so we have to get stuff burned before then." So they put so much diesel fuel out there to try to get it to burn that for the rest of that season, when you walk through the woods, you would encounter pools of diesel fuel, and the place smelled like diesel fuel. Uh, it's as John said, these forests in a natural condition, they are moist forest, and they're not prone to burn. Historically, there are studies that show that natural lightning caused fires on average went burned between a half acre to 2 acres. These guys now, just a few years ago, they tried to float a project where they were going to burn 5,000 acres. And by the way, they justify this because they say, well, the Native Americans burned. And so that's a reason, you know, that we need, the forest needs to be burned. So a few years ago, there was a project that where they announced they were going to burn 5,000 acres by dropping flaming ping pong balls from helicopters and using drip torches with napalm on the ground, like the Native Americans did. They didn't
Ridiculous.
say that. Yeah, but
Well,
that it
yeah,
was
the U.S.
it was so ridiculous that they did withdraw that project.
Yeah, the U.S. Forest Service is not one for science or history, that's for sure. But this has been great to get all of this information, and it's really sad that this is happening. But let me ask you to wrap this up here. So, obviously, I care about these forests, even though I don't live near them. I think pretty much all the Green Root podcast listeners and people who affiliate with Eco Integrity Alliance care for it, whether or not they live there, whether or not they've been there. But what would your pitch be to somebody, say, living in California or Georgia or Maine to care about the forests in your neck of the woods? Why should they care about this project in this forest?
Well, if crimes like this are allowed to proceed unchecked, they're only going to continue. There are only going to be more of them. And one of these days, if they haven't already, they'll be coming to a forest near you.
I think that's
And
absolutely correct.
and the important components when you start thinking about our planet and what we're going through right now with our climate change emergency. You know, it is upon us. The weather patterns are shifting so much, and storms. You know, as I tell people, every time you open your home insurance bill, you know, anyone that's got homeowners insurance is paying exorbitant uh, fees, and it's all because of all of these storms, the wildfires, um, you know, all of the problems that are affecting floods, storms, hurricanes. You know, the insurance companies spread that money out, you know, to um, uh, all their clients, and so that affects, you know, it's an economic thing, plus just the amount of tax dollars we devote to dealing with some of these emergencies that happen, the different tornadoes. You know, we used to have tornadoes that came through southern Illinois, about 3 months out of the year. They're they're 12 months a year now. I mean, we get tornadoes in December, January, and February. You know, it's you know, it's amazing. And again, this is impacting people throughout the world. And the importance, what we know now, the science is really starting to catch up with this industry about the importance of intact forests, of how when when you disturb that soil, how quickly that that forest becomes a carbon source instead of a carbon sink, because that cover on the ground is what keeps the carbon in the ground, and once they take those trees down, the leaves begin to decompose, the small branches that are just laying on the ground, and all over, begin giving off carbon. And now we've really got some good studies that are showing that these eastern forests that we have are really playing an important role, because we have so much carbon in the atmosphere that it seems that the younger eastern, our forests generally are significantly younger than the forest out west, because they cut them all down, and back before the national forests in the east were established, and you all were able to get some national forests established before they cut it all down. But but these forests are really doing a good job of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere more efficiently than a lot of the drier western forests. And it's also it's also physically cooling the earth. They've really determined there's um, this fact that it's called the warming hole, that they've decided it's really the eastern forest that is cooling the eastern US. The western US is heating up so much more and dealing with so much more drought than the east. Our growing seasons are extended. We're getting more moisture than historically we have gotten, and that seems to be related to climate change as well. And as a result, these forests are really important in this whole process. I mean, I care about those Indiana bats, those tricolored bats, and that aquatic life, that insects and fish that live in Bellsmith Springs. But as humans, we need to start looking at the bigger picture. We need to stop burning fossil fuels without question, but we still have too much carbon in the atmosphere. We've got to pull that carbon out, and these forests are playing a key role. And that's why we're proposing this Shawnee National Park and Climate Preserve, as a way to keep people thinking. Any forest that's standing is a climate preserve. It really is. And I want to stress that too. Even the forests that are actually have become carbon sinks, especially the older ones, that doesn't mean we should cut those down. That again, the older ones, there's a lot of stored carbon there. Hopefully we can turn this weather pattern around and start putting less stress on the western forest, and return a lot of that carbon sequestration abilities. But that's the climate is just really an important component. Even though, again, it's just 70 acres. Well, this isn't going to be the end of the 70 acres.
And
Absolutely.
your audience from coast to coast and border to border, they this is impacting everybody, as John has expressed very well. And even for people who don't care about the forest, who don't care about ecology, my fellow fiscal conservatives, they don't want to see their tax money squandered as corporate welfare to the timber industry, and that's exactly what this is. It's strictly financially driven, and it's to the detriment of real ecological restoration and real science for forest protection, uh, to understand our forest. So, and the Shawnee Park and Climate Preserve would be the nation's first climate preserve. And that's something that your entire audience could get on board with in their homeland. And we look at this as the first of many climate preserves for the country that it puts the value of the land over the interest of corporations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that is a great message. 100% agree. That's what we think public land should be. So, if folks want to get involved to help through either volunteering or maybe even donations, how would they get a hold of you and your organizations?
Well, Friends of Bellsmith Springs has a website. It's www.fobss.org. Friends of Bellsmith Springs, FOBSS.org. And you can see some pictures of Bellsmith Springs on there. You can see you can read about what's happening there, and there is an option for donations. And as this legal battle is becoming more protracted than we had hoped, we're going to need some more funding for the great folks at the Lewis and Clark College Earthrise Law Center, because this will not be the last battle they fight for us, I'm afraid.
Right. Yeah. Litigation is expensive. Definitely encourage folks to donate. John, do you have anything you want to add before we close?
Yeah, Shawnee Park and Climate Alliance also has a website. It's Shawnee NTL PARK. So ShawneeNTLPark.org. And we have an Instagram account, the Shawnee Park and Climate Alliance. Check us out on Instagram. And yes, we'll have updates and please any involvement that you can give us, we would appreciate it.
And anybody who would want to contact me personally with specific questions, or should any of your listeners ever want to pass through here and see what we're talking about, I'm generally available to take people on free tours of the Shawnee Hills here. And my email address is simply bellsmithsprings@hotmail.com.
Perfect. Well, I'll include the websites in the description. And thanks again to you both for coming on the podcast, for what you're doing, and really hope we can stop this. And even if we can't, perhaps it will be a warning call to people across the country that we have to get serious. And you all have been serious on this for quite some time. So I just want to personally thank you for all of your work on this.
Thank you for the opportunity to get the message out, Josh.
Yeah, Josh, this Green Root podcast is great, and the Eco Integrity Alliance, you've been in the trenches a while too. So thank you for all your good work.
Yes, and thank you.